So, welcome back to another version of ARCA's Elevated Views. Today I'm sitting here with Gary Playsted, the Regional Roofing Business Development Manager with Flynn Canada Limited here in Calgary. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Gary has quite a history in construction and in roofing, and one of the things that we wanted to talk about was the evolution of safety in construction, more importantly in roofing, and really how it's changed. So Gary, you've had a good opportunity to look at how it's changed over the past couple of decades, and I know you shared some things beforehand about certain events. So maybe let's go back to what you call the darker days. What was it like, say 40, 50 years ago, working in commercial construction and working in roofing in terms of safety?
Working in construction, it was very much the labor was the cheapest part, and it was not treated as the valuable asset it is today. Everybody needs men. Back then, there was a multitude of healthy people to man your workforce, and it was a time where safety was not a necessity, not a requirement, just maybe a nice to have. It was an afterthought. There was not really any need for compliance. Pre my time, fatalities were an acceptable risk, and they would calculate that into the project. And there was a few different ways they would calculate it. Either number of man hours would bring you a fatality, or dollar figure of the construction cost would bring you a fatality. The Hoover Dam, I believe over 25 or 30 people passed. And that was just a cost of doing business. Obviously, that's not appropriate and wasn't. And so it wasn't uncommon to see very little personal protective equipment or means or procedures to keep people safe. It has evolved, and we do have a great industry in construction today, but that came through a variety of things. Not the least of which was the West Trade Mine incident where 26 miners lost their lives. Before that time, there was no consequence to business owners or the leadership group to have real consequences for their actions. And so we would see guys roofing in the 70s in runners and cutoffs and no shirts, and a lot of them didn't wear gloves, and it was very much a time where it was almost cowboyish, and the lack of safety was almost a badge of honor. The West Trade Mine brought about Bill C-45 that brought the accountability. That took about 12 years from the early 90s. 92, I believe, was the West Trade Mine, May 9th. And Bill C-45 wasn't really complete until 2004. But by the end of the millennium, people knew it was coming, and it changed. It at least started to have the appearance of compliance. That was a situation where the contractors would put harnesses on the guy, but their guys would have nowhere to tie off their ropes. Would just be enough to keep the OH&S and the neighbors from really looking deeper at what you were doing. Today, it looks very, very strange when you go by a site and there's something wrong. No guardrails, no bump lines and warning zones. If you drive by a site and you see people up on the roof, that looks strange. And so we've done a great job as an industry to bring the standards to a much higher standard. At the turn of millennium, it was the appearance of compliance was the rule of the day. Very few people in our industry had actually railing systems to protect their men from falls. They had bump lines up, but the bump lines weren't always full systems. They weren't always the right distance. They didn't always have the line in place. Today, it's much different.
So it seems odd that where we're at as an industry right now, and we'll make a couple differentiations on that. It is hard to believe that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we didn't have some of the things that we have in place now. And like you say, it was like a badge of honor. Maybe not so much in roofing for falls, but I imagine probably a lot of burns dealing with asphalt. I've heard several stories of men they've tripped and hand goes right into the pail of hot asphalt. And that's like, oh, I remember when John did this, or I remember when Pete did this. And it has changed a lot, even some of the PPE, wearing the gloves, wearing the flame retardant workwear. It has spurred that safety industry, but I think it's also spurred a lot of innovation with safety.
Absolutely. My brother had a terrible asphalt burn in 1974, roofing a building that my dad owned, and my brother and I own it today. He was carrying 2 buckets of hot. They mopped over the skylight hole. He stepped in the skylight hole and burned from the top of his knees into the small of his back. It was a horrific accident, and at the time for our family, but again, it just was something that happened. And now we're so much more cognizant of safety. You wouldn't just roof over a hole and leave it. It just is a safer industry in general, not just roofing, but construction. And the ramifications of these accidents can be devastating.
My time in the commercial roofing, with the ARCA and even outside the ARCA, if something happens, and it's important even for the professional community to know, like the architects, consultants, and engineers, when something like that happens, it is well known in the industry when it happens. I think we can all tell who's had the accidents and when they've happened, because it does affect everybody on the roof. Doesn't matter what company you're working for, what association you're with. You hear about that. I know definitely provincially, also even nationally, when something happens, it kind of has that ripple effect across the country.
Absolutely, and I think as a group, especially in the roofing associations like the ARCA and the RCABC and the CRCA, there's a lot of empathy. It is extremely important that we learn from these, and like a near miss, this unfortunately, when you have an incident, it's not a miss, but it is important that we discuss it and look at ways to make the site safer. The one thing that I'm really proud of our members for at ARCA, we all are very, very cognizant of the cost on a human basis of your team members getting hurt. We empathize. A lot of our men were apprentices with other guys throughout the industry, and it does affect the group when somebody's injured. And we are very supportive as a group, and I think that's something that's really something to be proud of.
Now, with the commercial roofing side of it, as we discussed the bump lines, and it is a lot more common to see scaffolding going up onto the roof instead of the 40 or 50-foot extension ladder being tied off in the top and the bottom. But there is a differentiator between the commercial side and the residential side, where a lot of people don't know it, but the same rules do apply for everybody. Would you agree less enforced on the residential side than it is on the commercial side? Probably cost is the biggest driver in that.
Absolutely. At the risk of making the OH&S guys mad at me, a group like ours or other bigger commercial contractors, if we were to receive a substantial fine, it certainly wouldn't be good for your financials for the year, but you would find a way to pay it. A lot of these smaller contractors would just close their doors and they wouldn't get their fines and their levies. As ARCA contractors, we can't shut down and then come back and still be a member. We have to pay that fine. We can't run from it. The other side is a situation where at ARCA, our forces are our staff. They are employees. In the residential world, there's very few employees. They're all subcontracted. And when you have an employee, you can train him, you can ensure that he does things the right way. This is our procedure and this is what we're going to follow. When you enter into a subcontractor agreement, it is harder for you to maintain that control over safety or access. It is something that's very important for owners and architects and engineers to make sure that the access is something that's thought about. You're right about the scaffolding. There used to be 50, 60-foot ladders up. Now anything over 25, 30 feet, you're going up a staircase. Really, really safe. Our biggest asset is the employees, are the fellas that work on site. I can sit in my office all day, it doesn't get any roof put on. But the guys on site, they're super important in your business.
I think it's interesting too, because you call them your employees, but from what I've seen, you become very invested in the person and in their lives. One thing that's really struck me talking to a lot of the management of a lot of our members is it is more like a big family as well too. You deeply do care and you are concerned if something goes wrong, and you're not only thinking, oh, that's a lost time for this project or whatever, but a lot of our members, and I think you're included in this, think, well, that's going to impact their kids, their wives, their life, and how can we rally around it, right? And how can we improve so that doesn't happen again?
Absolutely. These crews, they're intertwined in your life. You see them every day. You interact with them. You know how many kids they've got. You know whether they're into ringette or hockey or basketball, soccer, what have you. You know where they go on holidays, and it is very much part of your social fabric. Much like when families have illnesses, it's not just the one person, it resonates through the whole group. You'd have to be pretty empathetic not to be really, really impacted by an accident, especially when there's a lot of ways you can mitigate those risks. It is important to do as much as you can and make sure that it's not an oversight or we always do it that way. The right way is always the right way.
So the phrase you used was brighter days are ahead. A lot of the rules and standards that have been put in place to protect the worker have spurred a lot of innovation where contractors have come up with unique ways to solve those situations, be it mobile anchor points or different types of rail systems. We could have a whole show just about the different pieces of equipment that have been invented over the past 10 to 15 years to solve those problems. But what do you see as kind of being the future, how this has grown? It is, I think, at a state now where somebody going to work can have that expectation that they're entering a safe workplace and their job is going to be relatively safe. There's always going to be some inherent risk, but there's ways that we can manage that risk. So what do you kind of see moving forward?
I think the biggest thing is the level of training that we've put forth as an industry, especially as the ARCA contractors, the fall protection, the WMIS, fire safety, the leadership and safety excellence, the fact that they're training on aerial platforms, and we are always finding ways to be safer. We, as our group at Flynn, we study where our injuries come. We've mandated a full-time glove program. We've gone through scores of types of gloves to make sure that cuts are less prevalent. We have changed the types of knives that we're using in multiple scopes to reduce cuts. We're now full-time safety glasses throughout the industry. The industry just keeps on taking that data, chewing it through, finding out where the weakness in the systems are, and then we work towards solutions. For myself, I just got graduated safety lenses so that I don't have to take my safety glasses off on site to read my phone or fill out my forms. So there's always things that are coming, and it's exciting to see our motto is at the end of the day, everyone goes home safely. And we're getting much closer as an industry and as a sector. The construction sector is much better. And I think the one thing that is really important for all workers is to understand that you do have the right to refuse unsafe work, and that as employers, we need to make sure that we back that right and find solutions to make those tasks safer, because there are ways to do things safely.
Might take a little bit longer, or it might take additional thought. There's always that way. That's great information.
Just on that, failing to plan is planning to fail. So
Yeah, I love that saying as well too.
if you're not planning how you're going to go through your project, it may not have the result as far as productivity or quality or safety. But if you plan it from the start and you plan it safely with productivity in mind, then chances are your project is going to be much better.
You ever run into conflicts, say with other trades or generals on site when it comes to the safety aspect? Because as you said, I think, well, definitely Flynn and other ARCA contractors spend a lot of time working on the safety. I know even the safety committee that ARCA had made of all the safety officers. It was interesting you were mentioning about the knives, and through their information and data that they collected, lacerations on a Monday after lunch was one of the most prevalent injuries.
Yeah.
Okay, so how can we look at that and address it and hopefully change things so that that doesn't happen? But do you find the other trades are on the same playing field for safety, or some ahead, some below? How do you see that mix, say, on a big site?
You know, teamwork is dream work. If you're working with really good project managers, the prime contractor, and they embrace safety, then you're not going to have problems. You see something, you say something, it gets fixed. It's not a big GC, small GC, because it's individual. But that being said, you always have the right to just say no. And then you follow that up with correspondence. This is what I see. This is what I feel is unsafe. Please send me a directive. And very few companies are going to put in writing, just do it anyhow. It can be uncomfortable, but having an uncomfortable conversation is a lot easier than going to see someone in the hospital, or worse. Mm-hmm. Your team members are too valuable to put them in harm's way.
Well, that is some excellent news about safety. Is there any kind of last thoughts that you have, or things that we didn't touch on?
I think that it's really important to just listen to ideas. Within our Flynn group, we have a lot of mechanisms for younger guys to put ideas forth. And there's a lot of great ideas coming from somebody who has fresh eyes on our industry. And so much of the progress has just started with, why don't we do it this way? Or have we thought about this? And I think that if we look at things with fresh eyes, or at least listen to the fresh eyes, we're going to get a lot of ideas on how to do things better in so many ways, including safety. Occasionally that means you're going to have to say, well, this is why we do this. And if you get partway through that and you go, oh, that actually isn't too bad. Don't be too proud to change. We're always looking for best practices. Definitely our group at Flynn, but as an industry, we're always looking for best practices. And that means that you can't be too proud to think yours is the only way.
There's many ways to skin a cat.
Yeah.
And like you say, it might just be those fresh eyes saying, why? Could be a valid reason, or could be not. So, well, that's fantastic. I'd like to thank you for sitting down with me today. This has been a great talk about safety. I look forward to other discussions we're going to have later on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of ARCA's Elevated Views. We hope you have enjoyed the program. For additional information on ARCA, our contractors, or our program, please go to arcaonline.ca Or you could follow us on Instagram at Roofing Careers or on LinkedIn at ARCA-Alberta Roofing Contractors Association. Thanks and have a great day.